If you're prepping for any event in the current Burst Protocol format, you cannot afford to miss out on what's winning games right now. Players aren't losing because their decks are bad. They're losing because they're simply not aware of certain meta trends and key interactions. In this video, I'll walk you through the deck building trends shaping the format, the relevant interactions you need to know, and some of the best cards to incorporate into your decks to counter the meta. Without any further ado, let's get into it. Starting off with how the general meta is going to be shaping up overall. Here I have the results from 4 of the regionals from the very first weekend of Burst Protocol, and the point I want to make here is that it seems like the format is kind of wide when you look at these breakdowns. Now I will caveat this whole section by saying these are regional results, you should take them with a grain of salt. A lot of decks can do well at a regionals but not convert at a bigger event like a YCS, so I'm not saying like these decks that you see here are going to be absolutely certain to become better relevant, but ultimately I show like these regional results just to give you guys an idea of what sorts of decks are able to compete in this metagame, even against the best decks like Branded Dracotail. Now, in terms of the results from the most recent YCS, here I have the results from YCS Richmond. Yes, there are multiple 300th YCSs, but I want to show this one because I think this is more representative of what we may see in the metagame overall. Like I said before, Branded Dracotail definitely going to be represented in top cuts. Probably the best deck in the format for sure. But I think the reason why other decks like Maliss and Magistus are also able to do well is because they actually have a pretty solid matchup into the Dracotail deck. Maliss, of course, has cards like Dimensional Fissure, which Dracotail struggles to beat, and Magistus' engine is generally pretty solid to the Dracotail deck overall. And so I think that personally, at least, these are 3 decks that you're going to be seeing in the metagame for sure. And in terms of like the other decks you see here, like Yummy, I think Yummy is still going to be a very powerful deck, especially if you mix in other engines like Tri-Brigade or Radiant Typhoon, and that is what ultimately ended up winning the 300th YCS. So even though it wasn't represented super heavily in like the top 64, these Yummy variants are also still another deck you need to watch out for when preparing for this metagame. Moonlight also did get one top 8 spot in this YCS, and I do think that's pretty reasonable. This is a deck that honestly, if it gets to go first and the opponent just has no out to Liger Dancer, it just automatically wins the game. Doesn't matter how good of an engine the opponent's deck has. Most decks' engines are not able to out a Lunalight Liger Dancer, especially when it's backed up with other things as well. While there are top decks like Dracotail, there are other decks that you're probably going to see at every single event like Maliss, Vanquishsoul, Yummy variants, even the deck like Lunalight. Just be aware of that when preparing for any tournament this format. In this next section, I'm going to be talking about like different deck building trends that we've observed in the best decks out there. And the first thing I want to talk about is whether or not to play the Branded or the Magistus package in the Dracotail deck. By far, the most popular variant of Dracotail right now is the Fallen variant with the branded cards. Most lists are not choosing to play the Magistus, but for the few lists that are, they're combining both the branded and the Magistus stuff together to make the Dracotail deck ceiling even higher than it already is. I think one of the biggest upsides of the branded engine is that Fall on the White Dragon doesn't have to take up your normal summon. You're able to still use it on cards like Malulu and Lucius later on in the combo if you have that. Fall on the White Dragon also gets you access to Albion in the graveyard, and Albion can get access to Fall on the Virtuous, which is one of the best cards in the format at the moment. I also generally think that there are like less bricks in the Fallen variant, because even a card like Ecclesia, in certain builds, it's not necessarily going to be a brick if you play multiples, because you can just take out the Ecclesia, summon the Fall on the White Dragon from the deck, and do your combo from there. But on the other hand, a big downside of the branded engine is that it doesn't actually bridge to the Dracotails when you just have the branded engine alone. Like, you're able to get access to a Cartesia and access to all the branded stuff in the end phase, but if you don't see a Dracotail name, like the engine doesn't actually get you to where you need to be. Whereas on the other hand, in terms of Magistus, like just the Magistus cards alone are able to get access to the Dracotail side of your deck. So I think that's like one big difference between the two engines. Branded is definitely a lot better if you already see some other engine cards in your hand, but something like Magistus is like a very self-contained engine. It's able to completely bridge from one side of the deck to the other side of the deck, but at the cost of having to play like a bad card like Zeroa, and at the cost of having to use your normal summon on Zeroa, where it means you don't have access to normal summoning a card like Lucius or Malulu later on in the turn. So overall, which one do I think is better? I personally still do think that Fall on the White Dragon is slightly better than Magistus. I feel like it does offer the Dracotail deck a lot more pushes, just because it doesn't take up the normal summon, and while it doesn't necessarily bridge the two engines together like by itself, I guess you could still play a very self-contained like small branded package and back that up with a couple of non-engine to at least give you a couple of turns. So overall, I would expect the branded engine to continue being the most popular variant of Dracotail, but I just wanted to make you aware that like the Magistus variant definitely still meta relevant as well, and there is a chance that eventually players could just pivot to a bigger engine deck and play both in the same Dracotail list. I also wanted to make you aware of one specific tech or line of play that the Dracotail / Brandon deck has access to, and that's going to start off by getting access to a card like Cartesia. As you all probably know, Fallen the White Dragon does eventually get to the Ecclesia Synchro, and the Ecclesia Synchro tags out to Cartesia. But then instead of doing like normal Dracotail plays from here, they can use Cartesia plus any light or dark monster to make a Gargoyle, and then Gargoyle is going to be able to dump any big light or dark floodgate monster like Invader of Darkness or Archer Christia to their graveyard. And then since the Branded engine gets access to Fallen the Virtuous in the combo, they're going to be able to use Fallen the Virtuous to bring back that monster from the grave because they have an Ecclesia monster like in rotation from the Synchro. And so this can be a sort of almost like auto win or FTK combo against most decks depending on like what monster they're dumping. Invader of Darkness of course is going to be very good against the Radiant Typhoon deck, and the Archer Christia is generally going to be pretty solid into every single deck out there. Now, this is not to say this is the best way to play these decks or that every list is playing it, but I think you should just be aware that this is one possible line of play that they can do. If they are able to get access to their full combo uninterrupted, this is something that they can be very easily weave into their combo if they are playing these cards already. One of the best decks that we have in the format right now is Radiant Typhoon, and in this section I wanted to quickly talk about a couple of ways you could beat the deck and things to watch out for when playing against it. So their main form of interruption is going to come from Radiant Typhoon Mandate, which is going to turn any MST activation into sort of like a Hot Red Dragon Archfiend. Now the key thing to remember with this, one, like this can be chain blocked, so like if you activate MST and you have like a quick play spell or a quick effect, you can simply use that and the Radiant Typhoon Mandate won't be able to activate. And another thing to remember is that the interruption is like Hot Red Dragon Archfiend, where it does need to successfully target that face-up card to be able to negate it. One additional way you can play around this, in addition to chain blocking it, is simply removing the card that they're attempting to target with the Radiant Typhoon Mandate if possible. So for example, I'm showing Double Cyclone here because it's very similar to how Dracotail Flame works. Like, let's say you activate a spell card like Sky Striker Engage. Your opponent's going to activate MST, like targeting something, Mandate, targeting your Engage. You can simply remove the Engage from the field with a card like Double Cyclone and use that to pop like the Radiant Typhoon Mandate. Basically, it's very similar to how Dracotail Flame works. If you're able to remove the card from the field, then it's not going to be able to successfully negate. It's also important to be aware that this Radiant Typhoon Mandate is a once per chain card, so once they activate that effect to try to negate your face-up card, it's not like, even if they have multiple other MSTs, they can't like attempt to negate the card that you're trying to like dodge the first MST with, for example. And so a really good way to play around Mandate is just like hold those cards that are able to remove your own cards from the field, so cards like Droplet and Double Cyclone, for example. It should give you a pretty good way to play around one of the best interruptions that Radiant Typhoon does set up. Something else to be aware of when playing against Radiant Typhoon is to watch out for Sheena. Basically, the way Sheena works is like if they have a wind monster in the field and then you activate something, whether it's a monster effect or a spell trap effect, Sheena's able to come out from the hand and is able to either bounce all the monsters you control to the hand, or it's able to bounce all your spell and traps to the hand. So this is something to be very careful of when playing against this deck. As soon as they put a wind body on the board, you really need to think about how you're going to use your monster interruptions or your spell and trap interruptions, because if you're not too careful, and let's say you're holding a bunch of like trap cards in the back line that you want to save for later, a card like Sheena can completely blow you out. So I think the biggest thing to watch out for in terms of like bomb cards from Radiant Typhoon is definitely going to be this. It's not always possible to play around this card, but I think at least if you are aware that it exists and that most lists are choosing to play it, you should be able to have a better time sequencing your interruptions and disrupting your opponents. In this section, I want to talk about some of the deck building trends that we've observed in like Canine variants. And the first thing I want to bring up is most lists are choosing to play 2 copies of Canine Lantern instead of 1 copy because a card like Jokel did go to 1. I think this is something that's not going to really affect the way you play too much, but I think it's important to know that they have access to a second Lantern, because most of the time back in the day, like once they went through their first Lantern, you know that like future searches are not going to be able to generate like 2 bodies off a single card for the most part. But now I think that since players are pivoting to 2 copies of Lantern, they have a much stronger grind game than they have before, because they can burn through the first one during their turn 1 combo, and then later on, if they get a search off like Ripper or something, or if they don't need a search for Azuna off of a card like Case, they can simply grab a second Lantern to threaten another rank 5 right away on the follow-up turn. Something to also watch out for is Chaotic Element specifically. This card is basically a Rhoda for specifically Lantern and Jokel, but with a few additional effects. It's also able to add them back from the graveyard, so there's possibility for even more potential follow-up for the Canine player, even if they burn through a copy of Lantern already, because they can just simply grab it back from the grave. But the reason I bring this up is because I think that knowing that your opponent potentially play Chaotic Elements is going to be pretty important in any mirror match where you yourself are like playing Canine monsters. The reason being, Chaotic Elements also has like bonus effects to like pop cards or steal monsters based on whether or not your opponent controls light or dark Aqua Pyros. And so most of the time that's only going to be like Lantern or Jokel. If you happen to leave one of those monsters on your end board, you're going to be pretty vulnerable to a card like Chaotic Elements, attempting to like banish it from the grave to steal one of the monsters you control. And so while not every K9 list is going to play Chaotic Elements, I think it's just important to be aware of in any K9 mirror match you play, you probably don't want to be leaving cards like Lantern or Jokel on the board. Something else to be aware of is the new K9 X Ripper card. The reason I'm bringing this up is because not every list is going to be playing this in their extra deck, at least from what I've seen. It's not standard at the moment. Some lists are playing it, some lists are not. But I think I want to bring this up because this is one of the most devastating cards if it's able to successfully resolve. I think when you're going about breaking a K9 board, it's going to be important to consider, one, whether your opponent has access to like the quick play spell to rank up into this, and then two, like whether or not you're going to be able to play through a potential board wipe later on in your combo. If your opponent's able to save their quick play spell for very late into your turn, this card can simply be devastating and completely wipe out an entire turn's worth of progress. For this next section, I wanted to quickly go over different ways that people are choosing to play the Maliss deck at the moment. I think one of the most interesting ways is that people have been going back to the Terahertz build. They'll be able to dump cards like Cyber's Save Worm or Code of Soul to the graveyard, meaning Cyber's, they get an extra spell trap negate off Cyber's Save Worm, and then Code of Soul allows them to quick effect link summon on the opponent's turn into presumably something like Cryptor. And so I think it's just important to be aware of when you're playing as the Maliss deck. Some lists are going to be able to get access to a spell trap negate in the graveyard now, meaning certain board breakers are not necessarily going to be as strong into Maliss as they may have been before. Something else the Maliss deck is also focusing on a lot more now is Firewall Dragon, and why this is important is because it allows them to recycle like key hand traps like Ash Blossom or Ghost Spell, for example, if they had to use it on their first turn. Like let's say they Ash from your Charmies. Later on in the combo, it's very likely they're going to be able to get access to Firewall Dragon and at least add 1 or 2 monsters back from the graveyard. And so not only will they have guaranteed access to follow-up, they're also going to be able to get access to those hand traps back from the grave again. Something else that Maliss decks like have been playing is also Protect Code Talker. Its effect is not super relevant, I think, for the most part. It's probably just more so used as like a link climbing mechanic, but it's important to know, like when playing as Maliss, that they have access to this quote-unquote extender now, where if they're able to make it and then make a Firewall Dragon later on, they can get a free Link 3 from the graveyard almost at any time and be able to continue link climbing from there. And then in this section, I wanted to talk about a specific tech or a line of play that I've been seeing a lot in Yummy decks, and that's going to revolve around the new Tribe Brigade cards. Tribe Brigade Arms Mauser basically just takes any 2 Beast, Beast Warrior, or Winged Beast monsters to make, and then when it's summoned, you can dump like 2 Tribe Brigade cards from your deck and or extra deck to the grave. Usually what the combo is going to entail is you're going to dump Tribe Brigade Spriggan's Kit from the deck to the grave, and then any Tribe Brigade monster that's able to have the effect to like banish cards, monsters from the grave to summon another guy out. So just as an example, you'll dump Spriggan's Kit and you'll dump regular Kit. Spriggan's Kit effect will be able to trigger to bring back regular Kit from the graveyard, and then it can banish your beasts from the graveyard to summon out a big monster like Shureg. Shureg not only it can act as an interruption on your end board if you just leave it there. If you don't have access to like a certain part of your deck yet, you can simply link it off and search any level 4 or lower Beast, Beast Warrior, or Winged Beast. This is probably not going to be as relevant if you are only playing like the Yummy with the Tribe Brigade stuff, but if you start to mix in cards like Radiant Typhoon, this means like you're able to bridge together both engines pretty beautifully. Since the Radiant Typhoon monsters do include Beast Warriors and Winged Beasts, if you only start with the Radiant Typhoon side of their deck, you can make Mauser, do this combo, summon Shureg, link the Shureg off, and anything else into a copy of Farragut. Shureg will be able to search any Yummy monster like Cups Yummy from your deck to your hand because it is a beast monster, and then Farragut can then summon it from your hand, and you can do the full Yummy combo on top of your Radiant Typhoon combo. Or even vice versa, if you start with just Yummy monsters, you can get access to the Radiant Typhoon side of the deck as well. And I definitely think that this is one of the biggest reasons that a deck like Radiant Typhoon Yummy was able to take down one of the YCSs this past weekend. Something else that's also kind of cool, if you have access to all of your engines already, worst case, this just gets you access to a double Dragon Lord. And one last thing to remember, even though the Yummy Snatchy does prevent you from link summoning Link 3 or higher monsters, because the Tribe Brigade monsters special summon them, like they don't link summon them, you're still able to summon Shureg even after using the effect of Snatchy. So really, there's no conflict between any of these engines. So in this section, I wanted to talk about some hand traps that you should be looking out for. And these are hand traps that weren't super popular in the last format, but a lot of players have started to incorporate into their decks now. The first one is going to be Ghost Mourner. This one is in most cases just another copy of Imperm, but in very specific cases, it is able to be used outside of the main phase, so it is a little bit better than a card like Baylor in certain cases. I think the most relevant interaction is going to be against the Radiant Typhoon deck. When they activate, let's say, a quick play spell in the draw phase, then they summon Crocea from the hand afterwards. Crocea is going to be one of the biggest choke points in the Radiant Typhoon deck, so if you are able to play a card like Mortar to stop it, then you have a better chance of preventing your Radiant Typhoon opponent from being able to pop off. I would definitely play 3 copies of Imperm before ever playing this card, but if you want extra copies of Imperm that are able to fill that specific niche of hitting cards outside of like on either player's turn, for example, I think Mortar is definitely something you can consider. Something else that a lot of players have also started to put back into their list are the sideframe monsters. Of course, Gamma, as we all know, is a very powerful hand trap. If you are playing Delta, you're definitely playing Gamma because Gamma is one of the best cards in the game. But Delta, I think, is important because it does stop quite a lot of the key spells in our current format. So think like any Radiant Typhoon quick play spell. You're able to stop like key Branded spells like Branded Fusion. And Delta is just generic enough to be able to hit pretty much any single matchup. If you remember from like the charts I showed at the start of the video, there's going to be a lot of valuable decks in this current metagame. So if you are just looking for a generic hand trap that's good into almost every single deck out there, I definitely think you won't be too upset with the sideframe package. Finally, the last hand trap I want to talk about is Artifact Lancia. I think this card is not super popular at the moment, but may warrant going back into the side decks just because of how popular a deck like Maliss is. In addition to Maliss too, Artifact Lancia is also one of the few cards that's able to completely shut out a deck like Lunalight. And since both of those decks did just top one of the most recent YCSs that we had, I think a lot of players are going to be trying out those decks more in this current format. And if you want a card that's good against both of them, then I think Artifact Lancia is one of the most underrated hand traps that we have in the moment. Yes, it is very targeted and very specific against certain matchups. If you have good enough coverage with like your other hand traps for like every single other matchup you have, I definitely think that playing Lancia can help give you a much better chance of winning those specific matchups like Lunalight and Maliss. And then finally, I want to talk about some important text or tech cards or stable cards that we've been seeing in the format as well. This is basically extra copies of Solemn Judgment for very specific decks. So you're going to be seeing this a lot in Dracotail decks when they do get to go first, because as long as they have an Arthalion on their end board, this card is going to be an Omni Negate. This can stop blowouts against them like Sheena or a Harpy's Feather Duster, for example, and your opponent can't do anything about it because it is a counter trap. One important interaction to note with this card as well is like, let's say after you've used it for the turn, you can use, since it is a trap effect, you can use its quick effect to reset it back from the graveyard and then use it again right away on the following turn. You don't have to wait an additional turn in between to like reset the card. And so I think when you're playing against any Dracotail variant or even branded Despia because they end on like Mirror Jade, this is definitely a card you want to look out for when they do set Unknown Back Row. Another important counter trap that we've been seeing is Curse Seal, the Forbidden Spell. This is very specifically for Radiant Typhoon. If you're able to stop a card like MST, for example, the deck honestly loses so much. They basically lose Radiant Typhoon Mandate as their interruption, and they basically lose any chance of being able to reset their Radiant Typhoon quick play spells. Of course, if you are playing against a deck like Sky Striker as well, it can be good against hitting a card like Engage. But for the most part, the most important spells that we have in the format right now are going to be concentrated in like the Radiant Typhoon deck. So if you want an extra card to hit Radiant Typhoon, this is definitely something you can consider. Speaking of cards that are good against Radiant Typhoon, like I talked about in the Radiant Typhoon section, a card like Double Cyclone is pretty good because it's able to remove the spell or trap that they may be targeting with Mandate, is able to dodge a card like Dracotail Flame. But I think also something that is pretty underrated is a card like Spiritualism. Spiritualism, what it does is when you can target a spell or trap the opponent controls, bounce it back to the hand, and the most important part of this card is that this card's effect and activation cannot be negated. So what that means is, let's say your opponent has Radiant Typhoon Mandate face up and 3 copies of Mystical Space Typhoon face down. You activate Spiritualism targeting their Radiant Typhoon Mandate, and there's nothing that they can do about it because this card's effect and activation can't be negated. Like, sure, they can chain their MSCs, try to like negate one of your other cards, but if this is the first card that you play, then you've basically taken out 3 interruptions with just a single copy of a card, and none of their interruptions can do anything about it to stop this. So this is a very specific side card, I think, against Radiant Typhoon as well. Even though it technically, I guess, does have some applications into like other decks like Dracotail 2. So I think Spiritualism has a lot of utility in this upcoming format, just because the 2 of the best decks just happen to have very important spell and traps that they need in order to interrupt the opponent with. Finally, Mistaken Arrest is also a pretty high impact card that we've been seeing in some side decks. You're probably going to see this in decks like Maliss for the most part, since they don't really care about searching. But this can be a really good card into a deck like, for example, Radiant Typhoon, Sky Striker, any rogue deck. A lot of the top decks do end up searching a lot through their deck. Even if you're going first and you're playing a deck that does require searching, if you're able to do your combo and then just flip this on your opponent, they're most likely not going to be able to play through the rest of your board. So Mistaken Arrest, I think, definitely a very powerful floodgate, lingering floodgate with like very little counterplay. So just be careful of how you're like structuring your search. Let's say you have a quick play search and a normal spell search. You probably want to try baiting this out with like your normal spell search first, and then so at the very least you can chain your quick play spell to get an additional search if your opponent does end up having this card. All right, so that's gonna wrap it up for this video. I know it was a bit long, but let me know if you guys enjoy this more in-depth type of discussion video, or you prefer something that's like more short and to the point. I'd be curious to hear what you think. Also, if you think I missed any important interactions that people need to know for the Burst Protocol format, do let me know in the comment section as well. Before I end off the video, I just want to give a quick shout out to Card Trader. You can check them out using my affiliate link in the description below and use code tcgsam for 5% off your entire order while helping to support the channel. Again, if this video is something you found helpful, then I'd really appreciate it if you consider subscribing to the channel. It only takes a second, and while it may not mean a lot to you, it does mean a lot for me, and it keeps me motivated to keep posting more videos like this. I'm trying to hit 15,000 subscribers before I graduate university at the middle of this year, so I really appreciate it if you can help me get closer to that goal. But with all that being said, I just want to thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one.